All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get ready for our next speaker. So by way of introduction, yesterday at the Security Onion conference, I had someone come up to me afterward and say, hey, is there anybody that's like deploying Security Onion to ICS and SCADA networks? And I was like, yeah, you need to be here tomorrow, as a matter of fact, because we have one of the world's leading experts on ICS and SCADA networks to talk about that. So just out of curiosity, would anybody be willing to admit that you are responsible for defending an ICS and SCADA network that you can talk about? A couple of folks. So we know how critically important this stuff is, even if you are not necessarily responsible for defending it. We know that it does affect all of us and can affect all of us if it falls into the wrong hands. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Chris Sistrunk.
Well, thank you for coming to BSidesAugusta today. It looks like it's been a great event so far, and let's kick things off. So let's talk about protecting SCADA networks. A little bit about me. I'm a registered professional engineer. I was with Entergy it's a power company in the South, in Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Texas. And I was there for almost 12 years. And I was about the last 9 or 10 years of that job, I was running their SCADA systems, different pieces of it. And then in February, I started with Mania on their ICS SCADA consulting practice. I'm a SCADA expert. I've been doing it a long time. I love security. I'm also a member of the DMP users group, which is an open protocol I'm going to be talking about today, and some other protocols as well I'll be talking about this too. And I'm a button pusher. I also like the blue team. And how I audit SCADA systems. Love that picture. If you've ever seen that movie Elf. Well, you have to do blue team, you have to know a little bit about red, right? So, another good picture I love to show. What happens when you use Nmap or fuzzer on an industrial control system? You get fainting ghosts. That's because a lot of the systems are 10 or 15 years old. They have network stacks that haven't been totally tested, and when you do even pings, ping of death, you'll get your devices just fall over. And what happens when your device falls over? Fudge. I didn't say fudge. And that was me whenever I started accidentally breaking my stuff, because I was like, well, let's just hook up stuff to it, start testing it in the lab when I used to work at Entergy. And me and my colleague of mine on the DMP users group, we started testing DMP3 protocol. He wrote a fuzzer, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a second. And we found so many vulnerabilities they got in the press. There's several of the articles that came out, and we're like, oh man, this is pretty serious. He wrote a fuzzer, put it up on the GitHub, and said, Chris, or DMP users group, he sent an email out to the DMP users group. He said, I've got this fuzzer that I wrote for DMP3. Does anybody want to test it? It's up on GitHub. So I downloaded it. First thing I tested, it just broke it. I was like, oh boy, we should take this off of GitHub. And so that was in April 2013. Adam Crane and I started Project Robust, which is Latin word for bulwark or strong. We wanted to give it that name because we wanted to take a protocol that was widely used in North America in the electric industry, water industry, also in the UK, Australia, and South Africa. It's the most widely used protocol for those SCADA systems as DMP3. We wanted to make it stronger. So in the course of since that time, we've come out with 26 advisories from ICS-CERT. We've got some more that still haven't been released, so we've got 32 tickets in now total. 24 DMP3 advisories, one with modbus and one with a serial-only protocol called Telecare 8979. And we wrote the ICS fuzzing framework called Aegis. We used to call it Medusa because it turned everything into stone, but then we're like, well, we need to do defense. So if you've ever seen the shield, the Aegis shield has Medusa's face on the shield. So you're using a little red team to protect and be blue. And if you want to go to the website, automatic.com /robust, it gives more detail about our project and also the code for the fuzzer. It's open source, so we've released it. It's got DNP3 in there. We're about to be releasing it later with modbus. And we're getting other ICS researchers to add more protocols to the framework. So automatic.com /Aegis. So a little bit about DNP3. Anybody ever heard of DNP3 before? Okay. Well, for those who don't know, it's a SCADA protocol that works on serial or IP stacks, and it's the same protocol no matter what. The only thing different is the TCP headers are slapped around it for the TCP side, or UDP. You have data link layer, transport function, and application layer, and then the newer version of it that just came out in 2012, we've got secure authentication. So you can do secure authentication built into the protocol, even over serial networks. And then you have maybe a master database like the command center, or the operation center for a power company, and you have its database like binary inputs like breaker status or the lights on, things like that. Analog inputs like megawatts or amps. And then its database in the remote terminal unit, the thing that's out in the field at the substation, it has the same database. So they talk to each other over TCP or serial. To dig into it a little bit deeper, this is a eye chart on purpose. This shows you all the fields that are available in this rich protocol. You've got all kinds of things for the link layer. You've got your destination and source, and you've got CRCs for everything because there's a lot of error checking involved. You have application headers. You have all these different function codes for the master to send, like read, write, select, operate, freeze, restart, open file, close file, and then the RTU responds with 3 function codes down here. You've got all these different just smarts in the protocol, and you can go up to 16 data blocks. So it just shows you there's a lot of features in this protocol, but there's also a lot of area to make a mistake if you're doing coding. So the fuzzing we did had tested things where they had never been tested before. So we found some vulnerabilities. These are some actual screenshots of the errors we got. We actually caused one RTU to lose its configuration. It sent an unexpected message. It went 100% CPU, and all of a sudden it rebooted, and whoops, configuration's gone. Oh, and then they popped a calc, and now they're in your system, okay? Don't know if that's actually going to happen. It could, if you know what we know. So the state of ICS and SCADA security, it's, for those who are not familiar with it, it lags IT by about 10 to 15 years. So the things that you guys are working on now on your enterprise systems, well, guess what? We still have serial networks. I had 1,200 baud links at my previous company. 735 SCADA-related vulnerabilities on open source vulnerability database since 2011. And Jericho, if you know him who runs that site, he says it's like kicking a puppy. I mean, it's so easy to knock these things over. One of the reasons why is for so long the SCADA companies that make these devices have done positive testing. So when you buy this new system, you go to the factory and you do a factory acceptance test, and we say, okay, send control 1. Okay, did send control 1 work? Okay, great. Send control 2. Read out analog 1, read analog 2. And they go do the positive testing, but they never have done the negative testing. So like the front yard is mowed, but the backyard has never been mowed, and when you mow it, you find like cars and toilets and who knows what you find in there. So please cut the grass. That's kind of, I'll put that picture there. So now what? We found out that, your SCADA system might have some vulnerabilities, and more than likely it does. So what can we do? We can ask ourselves some questions. What is the risk if this device is compromised? Okay, you can go to the standard risk analysis. I did this in Entergy for every RTU we had, and actually did a presentation on this at S4, Digital Bonds S4 in 2013. So you take the probability of the device failing times the impact equals the risk. So the probability might be the age of the RTU. Does it have any known vulnerabilities? Is the circuit that it's talking to, is it analog based line, or is it IP, or open 900 megahertz radio? And the impact is maybe location based, like how many customers are at this substation, or does it have a nuclear power plant connected to it, or how many transmission lines are coming out of it. Or you can do for water too. I mean, it's like how big is the pipe coming out of your water system there. So the impact may be the big factor there. What is this SCADA device talking to? Is it talking just to its local devices, or is it talking to a wide area network, like a SCADA system for a power company over many states? And is it segmented at all? Is all of your critical stuff talking to each other, or you've got critical and non-critical stuff talking? Does it use serial or IP protocols, or both? That's a big thing. A lot of people used to focus on security of IP protocols, but we found that you can fuzz over serial. How do we defend unsecured protocols? All of ICS protocols are unauthenticated and unencrypted. So how do you defend against that? Because you can't just go invent a new protocol right now and go install it. And it's going to take years and years for that to happen. So how do we deal with that? And let's think about physical security. That's an important thing. Can I just walk up to your substation and just walk in and plug in? And nobody will know? Lastly, and this was me at my previous company, will you be the one that gets the call at 2 in the morning when something goes down? So that was totally me. So let's anticipate the mitigations. What type of mitigations exist? Which one will you use? How will they be deployed? So you've got to answer those questions on the previous slide with what we have. So keep calm, the blue team is here. We are here. We can help. We can defend SCADA systems, even though they are very vulnerable. So how can we do that? We can do software, firmware patches, device upgrades, pretty simple. That's familiar in IT systems. We can configure the RTUs and other SCADA devices to have robust configurations, like turn off things that are not needed. Robust network configurations, is everything wide open, any on a flat network? We could probably do a little bit better job of making that better. Do we have any control system protocol tools that can help us out? There's starting to be more of those. Proper physical security and employee awareness. For those of you, do we have any vendors in here that make ICS stuff? Okay. Well, the last one is secure coding and secure development lifecycle for the vendors. And if you buy gear from vendors, make sure that you start making them do SDL, because that's new to ICS stuff, but it's been around from Microsoft and other companies for a long time. So that's kind of where we are. Hey, we tested the software. Let's ship it. Yeah. That's kind of what happens. And we find the vulnerabilities if you look. So will the regulations and compliance help us? Will NERC-CIP help us with this mitigations? Will NERC-CIP protect us against serial attacks? No, there's nothing in there. It's all routable protocols. They completely forgot about serial in the last revision, so they're thinking about that now. CFATs for the other folks, and like oil and gas, they don't really have any regulations and compliance for cybersecurity. So, can we rely on that? Well, we don't know. So the first thing we can do is get the bug fix, and that's pretty important. There's software updates coming regularly now from like GE, ABB, Siemens. They all have CERT teams, and a lot of the other vendors are starting to get the picture. We should start doing negative testing and do white box testing at the factory. So now they're starting to come out with patches. vendors have told me they've come out with patches for their software and SCADA software, but no one's ever downloaded that patch before. So it's up to the user too. You need to go ahead and get the patch. And then obviously, if anybody's done any patching on a control system, you can't just patch it like IT. You have to completely test it before you roll it out, because you may have dependencies in other parts of your network that break if something upgraded, and I've seen that happen. And it's not fun when you have to go roll everything back, but you have to have a plan for it. And if you've never done this, work with your vendors, because they probably have more experience in it. They probably made the same mistakes before and can help you out. So the next thing we can do is robust device like PLCs and RTUs. We can configure those more robustly, and also the SCADA master stations. For instance, you can use DNP3 secure authentication. That's one way to make it more robust. Is you can correct against replay attacks, because now you have to authenticate. Hey, I'm a so-and-so master, and you're the RTU I'm supposed to talk to. And RTU's, yes, you're the master I'm supposed to talk to, and then great, now we can talk. But it won't protect against things that are in the lower layers, like link layer and transport layer, if there's bugs in those. So at least it'll protect against the application layer. Now, I've seen this so many times. If you've looked at a configuration for RTU, well, if it's not used, but it's still enabled in the configuration. Whoops, that means I can go use it. So disable all of those unused serial and network ports. If you have, the next one is a workaround. So if you have a Windows HMI, human machine interface, and it's got some Windows services and it's vulnerable, well, can you make it auto restart if it crashes, instead of having to send a man out there 2 hours to drive? That might be one small workaround. And then check the default settings. Another big thing is, well, let's say we bought this device, and it's maybe a recording voltmeter, and I've seen these on the internet. A recording voltmeter that they hang on the side of your house to, if you've got voltage problems. But some of those have DNP3 enabled by default, and they're just willing to talk. So if you're not going to use DNP3 or any other service, just turn it off. We've seen several things on SHODAN, and you can go look, that have the same configuration. Like they're sending the exact same messages, and you go from one IP to the other, they all have the same output. And that's not supposed to happen. At least it wouldn't on my system. Anybody familiar with SHODAN? Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure knowing John Matherly. He's a good friend of mine, and we've been helping him to add more ICS and SCADA stuff to SHODAN. So this is one of his new reports that you can do, shodan.io, and I did a search on port 20,000. That's the default port for DNP3. And it's over 600 devices that show up. You got this neat little map that shows up. US has about 415 at this point, and most of them are on Verizon Wireless, like it's a cell phone radio. So it might be like, who knows, it could be a wind farm out in the middle of nowhere, talking, and it's wide open. And what John is actually doing, he's actually, and this is some of the, one of the protocols that he's using, he's sending an actual DNP3 command, a short message that we helped him put in his system, and it sends out a real DNP3 message, and whatever message he gets back, he puts in the headers and SHODAN. So I'm going to take this time to stop here to do some trivia. And I've got two things to give away, but I've got some more questions. So the harder questions I give the prizes to. So what does SCADA stand for? Does anybody want to raise their hand? Okay, you in the front?
Industrial Control System.
SCADA stand for, what is?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, ICS. Blue and white shirt there? Yeah.
Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition.
Yes, all right. Nice job. Okay. Let's ramp it up a little bit. What is the standard TCP port for modbus? Does anybody know? Okay. Well, I might have asked too hard a question. Okay, you got one.
It's 512.
Close. You're very close. Go down about 10.
502.
502. All right, so I'm going to give you this book, Bug Hunter's Diary. All right. You can actually search for modbus on SHODAN, and I'll show you that in a second. Does anybody know, if they were paying attention at the beginning of my talk, I kind of showed it briefly, what are the 2 start bytes for DMP3? It's always the same. And Wireshark couldn't understand this. So, anybody have a guess?
I saw the first one was 54.
Okay, it's close. You're really close.
I don't know what the second.
Okay, it's 0564. It's always 0564. And other ICS protocols have different start bytes usually. Okay, what year was Stuxnet discovered?
Was it 2012?
Nope, not 2012.
2011.
Nope,
2010.
2010. Who said that? Yep. So you're going to get the pick set from here. Some stuff. And anybody ever heard of Hadex? It recently came out. New malware. It's the second ever malware against the control system. Does anybody know what protocol Hadex used?
ECP3?
No, it's actually used OPC. OPC is OLE for process control. It's kind of like a Microsoft thing that allows Microsoft-enabled PLCs and HMIs to talk. That's you can Google it. Pretty good Wikipedia. And then anybody recognize what this is? You sure?
HMI.
Yeah, that's an HMI, human machine interface. This is one that my friend Dan Tentler, he's VIS on Twitter. He did a VNC scan of the whole entire internet at DEF CON, and then a couple of days later he was going back through the screenshots, and this is a control system for a caviar company in it's Calais, I think it's in Sweden. So he said it's the happiest little skater because this little person here is really smiling. So if you look at VIS's timeline going back about right after DEF CON, you'll see he put up a lot of these different ones that he found, and we've tried to report them and get them all. Hey, you shouldn't put your control system wide open on the internet. But there's an example of one, and he didn't actually try to go and click on any of these things. He even found somebody's curtains you could open and close. I mean, yeah. If they would have had a webcam showing you, that'd be pretty cool. Look, I'm opening somebody's. So here's a shot of ICS radar that SHODAN has, and we've got several different protocols. BACnet, which is building automation control. So this building probably has BACnet in it. Well, there's just over 10,000 BACnet devices on public internet. About 600 DMP3, Ethernet over IP, that's mainly used in oil and gas. There's almost 4,000 of those. Modbus, almost 14,000 of those. Niagara Fox, which is another building automation, there's 23,000 of those. And there's Niagara Fox with SSL, 159. And then Siemens F7, that's the same controller that they targeted in Stuxnet. Almost 3,000 of those. And actually, he's actually polling each one of those with the real protocol and getting a response. And this is a little, just a graphic that he can show, and it spins around, and you can see where all the industrial control systems are. And some of these are actually honeypots, so he's figured out which ones those are, and he's marked them. So let's keep going down device robust configuration. So when possible in the protocol, let's disable things that are required. For instance, in DMP3, there's a couple of function codes that it's probably not a good idea, like cold and warm restarts. That's function code 13 and 14. cold or warm restart. It just reboots the RTU, so that'd be fun, and just reboot the RTU until it doesn't work anymore. I mean, there's a real reason to have it back in the old days, but now I don't know how many companies are still using this, but that's probably not a good idea. Start stop application kind of does the same thing. You can stop your RTUs, save configuration, activate configuration, those function codes, and then the file transfer stuff. Probably not a good idea to allow those unless you've actually designed for it. If you've designed for it in your system and you need these function codes, well, we need to be able to monitor them and when they're used and make sure the right people are using those function codes. And if you can't disable them, there's several ways you can monitor them or block them with IDS or IPS or deep packet inspection firewalls. Okay, so the next thing we can do is harden our IP networks on SCADA systems. You can add routers, firewalls, DMZs, VLANs, same things that you use on IT systems, and they apply to control systems. If you don't understand your network, the bad guys sure will, because they're going to take their time. They've got all the time in the world to figure out your control system network. And you may not have time. You may not even know what you have, which is sad. There's a lot of companies that I've dealt with that don't know what they have. It's just they've inherited companies from mergers and acquisitions, and they just don't know. They just didn't have good record keeping of their databases. So another thing we can use is DNP3, since it has authentication, and there's several companies that actually can bundle DNP3 with encryption in the device, so you can use DNP3 secure authentication and TLS encryption on the, in the device and in the master. So let's do that if you had that availability. Also enable encryption and authentication on your remote access VPNs and radios. If you have, most of the industrial radios have some kind of encryption on them, so might as well turn it on. There's a standard called IC62351, which dovetails with secure authentication. It's a good standard to look at if you have a control system. It's got a lot of good details about encryption and authentication. And another thing, don't allow control systems protocols on your corporate network. Why would that ever happen? Or maybe conversely, why would you allow some enterprise traffic on your SCADA system? Do you need HTTP on your SCADA system? I don't know. If you don't, then don't allow it. Okay, we can talk about some ICS-aware network tools. Some of these that you are already familiar with, like Wireshark. It has, at least 10 SCADA protocols in there, and they're adding more all the time. It already understands, right out of the box. A lot of people that work for companies, vendors that make control systems have actually put the parsers in Wireshark. Well, there's also the ASE test set and another RTU test set from Triangle Microworks that you can actually download free versions of, and you can try to, if you don't want to pay for them, they'll only last like 30 days, but you can download these tools, and there's some actual free tools for like DNP3 and modbus and some other open protocols. You can download free protocol analyzers. Then, ever heard of SNORT and Bro? Alright, well they understand DNP3 and modbus. Hello? So there's also some other ones that are new. CyberX is a new company, and SilentDefense from Security Matters, they both do deep packet inspection on DNP3, modbus, and a few other protocols. Those are new. McAfee ADM, Bayshore Networks, and Checkpoint also understand DNP3 and modbus. So if you've got those systems, let's start looking at our SCADA traffic. Routers such as the Cisco Connected Grid router, it understands DNP3 function codes. You don't want to block all your function codes, so some of them are always going to be needed. But at least you can monitor it. It's something you can do. And then to field firewalls, like industrially hardened firewalls that go out in the field, from Secure Crossing and Tofino, they actually have modbus. And Secure Crossing has DNP3 and IC 6870-104. and maybe a few others that they've added. But the customers are starting to ask for new features and new protocols for control systems monitoring because their 15-year-old RTUs, accept all this traffic, and if it's bad, doesn't validate inputs like we've shown when we did our fuzzing. And guess what? You can put security onion in a control system, and put it in monitor mode, and boy, who knows what you might find. If you have a SOC, now let's start doing that at your if you have an enterprise level SOC, well, let's add in the security pieces from your control system. Then you have enterprise-wide network security monitoring. Because, hey, your control system's a network too, and you got to protect it. So put security onion in. Anybody remember who this is?
Yes. Cliff Stoll.
Cliff Stoll, okay. So I made this little graphic. I don't always see the hacker log in, but I'll sleep at my desk until I catch him. That is, when I read that book, it really, a light came on. He was so determined to get this guy. And some of you in here shaking your heads, you probably have the same drive to look for this stuff. First time I ever, it was just right after I started Mandiant. I got a new laptop, this laptop here, and I downloaded some tools I needed for my control system stuff. And then I get an email from Doug Burks, like 2 minutes after I downloaded it. He's like, here's an MD5 of what you just downloaded, or was that malware? I was like, what the heck? 2 minutes after I downloaded it, that's pretty cool. That really impressed me, that you can do that if you watch your system. Well, like in the cuckoo's egg, we in SCADA security are in 1986. No one, or maybe I shouldn't use absolutes, very, very few people are monitoring their control systems. I think you have only known about, besides me talking about it, you've got Joel Angle, SCADA hacker. He's got a link to it on his site, and there might be a few others that are rogue that don't talk about it, that might have installed it, or any other NSM. But security is free, so just grab a box, put it in there, and away we go. Well, if you've got the old version of the book, he's got this on the inside cover. Shows how the hacker in Hanover got into Lawrence Berkeley Lab system and then pivoted to these other sites. Well, is this happening in your ICS system right now? Are they coming in to your company onto your SCADA net instead of ARPANET or MILNET? Are they going to your DMZ? Are they going to your corporate network? Are they coming in to your RTU or the pumps or whatever you might have, your power plants or your oil refineries? Or are they going to a third-party customer connection you might have? Do you know? Are you sure? Well, I wrote a blog post. I'll write for Liquid Matrix. Anybody ever heard of Liquid Matrix? Okay. Go to liquidmatrix.org, and I've got a blog post. Is there a cuckoo laying eggs in your control system? And the too long didn't read is you need at least one person who really cares, like Clostol did, and like some of you do. He used to have Security Onion or any other network security monitoring tools. And I suggest using a honeypot, like Conpot, or even build your own. Because that's what Cliff did. He actually wanted to catch this guy and had to put files in there that took 2 hours or 3 hours to download over 9600 baud connection so that the Germans could, hand trace these calls because it is all electromechanical equipment. So, and you can even do full packet capture over serial channels. You don't have to use printers anymore. You can use terminal servers. There's a couple of terminal servers out there that allow you to do port mirroring and send it to a TCP socket. So, Chris, why haven't we seen many ICS incidents? Because you can't see where you aren't looking. So, that's really the truth. The reason why we haven't heard of many ICS incidents is because nobody really has monitoring on their control systems. So, put NSM in your ICS SCADA now. And you can do it, free, almost free, and it won't take a whole lot of your time just to set one up because of Doug's and all his colleagues doing the next finish thing. So let's talk about proper physical security. If you have a critical SCADA master like your transmission grid or your, your water SCADA for the city of Los Angeles or something. Well, if it's talking serially to a little bitty distribution RTU out some in the middle of nowhere that has just a little name a cabinet box on it, no lock on it or anything, does that really matter? Is that okay? Because I could just open the box and denial of service your master station and take down your critical system. Do you use locks that are hardened? Not just the little brass padlocks that's been around for 50 years that everybody has a key to. And all the contractors have a key to. And maybe, people that are not even employees have a key to. Hardened external barriers. Better defenses you have, the more time it buys you for your response team to get there. So, in the real world, if we could afford this at every substation, we'd have a castle, we'd have Doug, we'd have machine guns and Reed Whiteman with digital bond, and we have Cliff Stoll up there, we have some alligators in the moat, So you can use things like 3/8" mesh because you can't cut through it with a pair of bolt cutters. You have to use little wire mics. You have to cut 350 of them to get through the fence. Or use, like when that substation was shot, Metcalf substation. Well, let's put some firearm. It listens for the shots and it helps locate where the shot came from. Use hardened keys. More not bump proof or pick proof, or at least grade 6 locks that are. You can't really break into. I've tried, and it took me longer than 15 minutes just to try to do one thing. I was like, okay, it's easier just to do something else. Okay, so thieves hit our store last night. This is how they circumvented the door alarm. are your barriers like that? This is from Reddit, so that was it. Just because you have a good lock doesn't mean you can't get through there. This is my friend Senak Pong on Twitter. He took a picture of the pipeline and says, please don't climb on the pipeline because you know what happens next. He wouldn't let me have the picture when he was actually on top of the pipeline, but people don't follow directions. And the last few things I'm going to talk about is employee awareness. Training your employees on security, being aware. If you have NERC-CIP compliance, well, the compliance kind of helps drill that into your brain. You can send them to security conferences. ICS-CERT has lots of free training opportunities. And they even have stuff on their website. You can go take little exams for free to test your knowledge on OPSEC or SCADA security basics and get the new GICSP certification. Some people really like to have certifications, so there's a few of the big oil and gas companies that are now requiring it to have you be a consultant on the SCADA system. You have to have that cert. Security awareness is all about a questioning attitude. Just because you say it can happen, can it really? Can you do something else? And if you find something suspicious, is there a hotline you can call at work? If not, you call your supervisor. What's the process? Do you call ICS-CERT? And there's a number. So, to finish up, I've let a few questions at the end. DNP3 and other SCADA protocols are going to be here a long time. Ask your vendors to put secure authentication in and put encryption in their devices. Do negative testing. Do white box testing. Required in the procurement language. Put it in writing and say, you will be more secure by doing this, 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 this. Send off these devices to a third party and let them be hammered on, like somebody like IOActive. They've got a world-class team that breaks stuff. Or just others, like Digital Bond, others. It doesn't matter. Send them off, have them tested if you can't do it in-house. Do positive testing, FAT, SAT, and then also do negative testing. And you can download some of these fuzzers for free. Get ours for free, the Aegis fuzzer, and add to it. It's not new, it's been around, but it's new kind of in control systems. But, to be honest, since we haven't really had any events, and people like electricity, I'm still kind of more worried about these guys. Because that's really, to bring it back down a little bit, my level of worry is not really high right now. But we can go ahead and do these things now, these defensive things, now before something really bad happens. Now, protecting against squirrels, there's many ways to take out squirrels if you'd like. So, to conclude, DNP3 is not a special case. All these other protocols are going to have the same problems, and we're going to be adding these to the fuzzer, and trying to get people to do these testings and patch. You can defend your SCADA. You do have all these tools available to you. Put Security Onion in. It's we've got a heck of a team that's supporting that. Do remember that compliance is not equal to security, but the culture is kind of important. And don't count on the government to protect your critical systems. It's your job to do that, not anybody else's. Does anybody have any other bad ideas on how to protect control systems? Any ideas or questions? All right, front.
I have a question about patching.
Okay.
One of the problems in the past has been that vendors take a long time. There's certain pieces of the system where they have to test a patch and provide the patch, and it takes several months or a year before they provide those patches. How do we convince them or move them along a little faster, because that can be a serious problem?
It depends. So if, like in my case, I was before I joined Many, I was at a power company. We owned millions of dollars of their equipment. So if your vendors, if I say jump, they usually say how high. But if you're not in that position where you can say that, you can also leverage ICS-CERT and others in the community. Even just call me and we'll just start banging on them and say, hey, we need to get this fixed. We actually, with one of the DNP3 vulnerabilities, it almost took them a year to get a patch out. The fastest one was like 17 days. So some of the companies are starting to get the idea, but some of them still have their heads in the sand as far as understanding what Patch Tuesday is really supposed to be like. Some other questions in the back? Okay. Well, you in blue shirt with the sunglasses?
Wouldn't the goal, since the vendors aren't patching as quickly as they would want to be, you showed the way that the cuckoo got into the system, but to reduce the number of points into the SCADA network to make it a closed network through tunneling and reducing the endpoints. Is that not a focus of the energy companies right now, to reduce the access into the network instead of putting it across the WAN, like you said?
Yeah, it all depends on the company. Yes, sometimes some of the companies are reducing the amount of their perimeter, and sometimes we've got 900 users. Well, some of them are paring that down to who actually really needs access to those. So it's really dependent upon the companies. They may actually need that many endpoints for their business. So it's going to be a case-by-case basis. So did that answer your question?
It's a focus based on the business.
Yeah, it's really going to have to, every control system is going to be completely different. And, yes, it's good to have a smaller footprint, but if you've got, 100,000 sensors that you've got to deal with for whatever process, it might be important to look at it as a big picture view, too. Okay, blue shirt in the back.
How can you say there's been very few instances of breaking as an industry? IDS and IPS is so underserved. Less than 10%, 5% of people actually use any sort of IDS out there instead. So
Yeah, there's not very many that do it all. And I know this, I can't say how many incidences have happened. I'll talk to you later if you want to talk to me about it, but there's been, not very many actual real incidences from ICS-CERT. Well, again, just because it's open may not mean it's a target right now. But again, we don't have security onion or other NSM deployed everywhere, and we may not just know. I know for a fact that there's configures still floating around several oil and gas companies right now, and they're having to deal with it because they still have XP and Windows 2000 systems. Yeah, some of them are, and some of them are completely flat. So, Gray Shirt?
Yes. What have you seen in regards to outage strategies and handling the security updates? The facility operations don't typically take outages for this security updates.
Right. Okay. So in a power company, I can speak to that. It's during the summer they try not to have many outages at all. As a matter of fact, they've reduced. A lot of the electric utilities have reduced the number of database updates to less than 10 a year. So it's all completely coordinated, and they try to limit the amount of database roles that they do. Another thing that the electric sector has done is there's this exercise called GridX, where they have a cyber, almost like a hurricane drill, but for cyber events, and they get all these different connected utilities and pretend and have real role play scenarios. It takes like 2 or 3 or 4 days, and they actually role play. Oh, okay, Southern Company just got hacked. Oh, and they pivoted over to Entergy, and they've taken out this system. What do you do? So they role play that. So the other companies like oil and gas and water, I'm not sure if they have those yet, but the electric sector definitely does do planning for that. And each company in the electric sector is usually thinking about it in terms of disaster recovery and incident response. So reducing the amount of databases, and then working through your configuration management and things like that, and then your disaster recovery. So in the back.
I think one of the biggest issues that we're seeing is what I call the ostrich effect, both from our vendor and especially from our people and managers who really they don't know. But I get that, that won't happen here. We won't have that problem here. We don't have that problem here. What do you think what would you point as some good strategies to point out to them or show to them that you actually do have these vulnerabilities in your systems, whether you know it or not? Yeah,
it's a combination of strategy. Does your C-levels care about security? If they don't, then it might be time to start getting them. And there's different ways to do that. If they don't have compliance-driven security mandates, like with NERC-CIP and the power grid. And then there's also grassroots. If you see something, say something about it. Hey, I don't know if you have a whistleblower, but whenever I found these vulnerabilities, I was the first person at my previous company to find a vulnerability in our control system. And they're like, we don't know. We just trust you. So I did the responsible disclosure route and said, okay, I'm going to get ICS-CERT involved because that's the right thing to do. And just maybe education is the first start. Because it's more in the mainstream now, and showed them some of these news articles, even though they're kind of hand-wavy, but at least it brings our attention. It's like we're having things with Target and Home Depot and all these things. It could happen to control systems, too.
Sure, from a vendor patch.
Yeah, exactly. And there's threats targeting it, but we don't know. Like I said, we don't have any eyes and ears everywhere, so we don't know what's active right now.
And a lot of times, too, they point to the physical security, which, granted, is pretty good where I am.
Okay.
But, that's not the be-all, end-all. Like, if you have a trusted insider, your insider threat, that's where Stuxnet came from.
Yeah, if you think you trust somebody and then, hey, we didn't think about that path. Oops. Yeah, so maybe you can think of some ways in your own organization to raise a level of awareness for security, and if there's other like-minded people like you, get together and start, because no one else is going to do it for you. Yes?
What are you seeing in regards to, what we see is a lot of vendors that want this digital wireless instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Are the vendors, are they preparing and securing these big wireless instruments now?
Yes and no. So, like smart meters, they're all wireless usually. The first few that came out were not very secure, and they've had several revisions, and they've all been tested supposedly by third parties now, and they're more secure. Some of my colleagues in other security companies have been doing pen testing on those devices. So, and as far as the electric sector, yes. And even the big companies like GE that makes radios and ABB that makes radios and all these others are starting to get the hint. If it's a smaller company, they may not know. So again, it depends on the wireless. But yes, they're starting to do more security on those for sure.
I just wanted to comment further on what you said in response to compliance. A lot of C-level types really want to keep their compliancy. And one of the things that we don't do in compliance is auditing, and so the CNA process gets lost because we're wanting to keep compliance, whether it's PCI, NERC, or whatever the case may be. So most of the times, if you can get auditing done on a regular basis, that will enhance your proposition for maintaining your compliance and things like that. But it's also up to the security engineer or the project managers to also define the effective plans for auditing networks, and then so in our case we usually start with NIST 800 as a mechanism for CNA, and that gives you leverage to get auditing done. So a lot of companies just don't do auditing; they just try to meet their compliance and go off.
Right, and again, it depends on, like with electric grid, they do a lot of auditing, and NERC, SIP, and the FERC, and in the South is CERT, they have CERT audits, and then internal audits. But if you have a company that doesn't do audits, then again, start somewhere, and you got to, take it into your own hands. It might not be a bad thing to do to start, because, like with me, in my previous job, we had a compliance budget. We didn't have a security budget, so we would have to sneak security in with the compliance stuff to leverage those funds, things like that. If you don't even have a compliance budget, well then maybe it's time to start talking about auditing yourself, or having some third party come in and audit you just because you care. I mean, it's just because we have all these systems and they're not vulnerable. But they are vulnerable, and we just need to, somebody kills the lights, we would have the security onion installed, we would have known what caused the lights. Yeah, that's right. Any final questions? All right, well, thank you so much for coming.